When dozens of Irish merchant seamen were captured at sea, they refused to work for the Nazis and were sent to concentration camps. This is a forgotten story of their incredible bravery and the brutal price they paid for their defiance. In the grand story of World War II, neutrality often seems like a footnote. For Ireland, it was a complicated declaration of independence. The nation called this period the emergency, and it was a time when the island was effectively blockaded by sea. Its lifeline, the merchant marine, was tiny. When war broke out in 1939, Ireland had just 56 ships. Most weren't built for crossing a hostile Atlantic Ocean. This small fleet had the massive job of keeping the country from starving. These ships sailed alone, painted with the Irish tricolour and the word "ERA" in huge letters, hoping that U-boats would respect their neutrality. It was a huge gamble. For many, it was a losing one. 20% of the seamen on these Irish ships would die in a war that wasn't officially their own. But there's another story here, one that was deliberately erased for decades. It's a story of capture, courage, and a horrifying journey into the heart of the Nazi regime. While Ireland stayed neutral, some of its citizens found themselves in a moral battle against the Nazis. What happens when your neutral country can't protect you, and you're forced to choose a side? This is a forgotten story of the Irish sailors who chose defiance and paid a brutal price. The South Atlantic in January 1941 was supposed to be safe. For the crew of the British liner, the SS Africa Star, the trip from South America was routine. On board were several Irish merchant seamen, like 17-year-old cook Harry Callan. The war felt distant, but the German war machine had long arms. One morning, a ship appeared on the horizon, flying a neutral flag. But as it got closer, the friendly disguise melted away. Gun ports opened, revealing a German surface raider, the Cormoran. The Africa Star didn't stand a chance. As their ship was shelled and sunk, Harry Callan and his shipmates scrambled for the lifeboats. Plucked from the ocean by the German sailors, their war wasn't over. It was just beginning. They were now prisoners of the Kriegsmarine. Their journey took them to occupied France, and then by train deep into Germany, to a prisoner of war camp called Stalag XB at Sandbostel. They were now just numbers in a vast system. But for these Irishmen, a unique and twisted ordeal was about to begin. Inside the barbed wire of Sandbostel, the Irish sailors were singled out. German intelligence officers saw an opportunity. They figured that men from a country with a long, bitter history with Britain could be turned. The Guard suggested that as Irishmen, they should be working against Britain. For the Nazis, it was a simple case of the enemy of my enemy is my friend. For the Irish sailors, it was an outrageous idea. They were civilian mariners, not soldiers. They signed up to haul cargo, not to be pawns in a political game. They all refused. Their defiance confused their captors. In September 1941, about 50 of the Irish seamen were moved to Marlag UND Malag Nord, a camp specifically for merchant sailors. Here, the pressure grew. The Germans changed tactics. They argued that because Ireland was neutral, its citizens weren't prisoners of war. The Germans insisted, free civilians. Patrick O'Brien, one of the sailors, later wrote this trap. They claimed I was an Irish national and was therefore a free civilian, a claim which at no time I had ever made. As free civilians, they weren't protected by the Geneva Convention and should be willing to work. They were taken to Bremen and ordered to repair railways. They refused. They were taken to Hamburg to work on German ships. Again, they refused. Time after time, this small group of ordinary sailors stood firm. They were merchant seamen of the United Kingdom. They insisted, prisoners of war captured at sea. Their refusal to become what the Germans called Frei Arbeiter, voluntary workers, sealed their fate. The Germans had run out of patience. The Gestapo stepped in. One night, 32 of the most defiant Irishmen, including Harry Callan, were dragged from their bunks and thrown onto trucks. They were no longer in the hands of the military. Their future now belonged to the SS. Their destination was Bremen-Farge, a satellite of the Neuengamme concentration camp system. This was not a POW camp. It was a place of punishment, a labor camp built on the SS principle of Vernichtung durch Arbeit, extermination through labor. On arrival, the Irish sailors were brutally beaten by SS guards and told that neutrality meant nothing here. Their new home was a massive, disused underground fuel tank. In the damp, freezing dark, they were thrown in with over 10,000 other slave laborers being worked to death on a top-secret Nazi project. The project's code name was Valentine. It was a construction of a gargantuan, bomb-proof submarine pen, a factory meant to assemble the U-boats the Nazis hoped would turn the tide of the war. The work was inhuman. The prisoners were forced into 12-hour shifts, mixing and pouring thousands of tons of concrete. The food, as one survivor put it, was atrocious in quality and quantity. Disease was everywhere. Punishment was swift and deadly. James Aldous Furlong, a survivor from Wexford, later wrote, "I have seen people being flogged to death and shot, and was always afraid my turn would come one day." In this hell, the 32 Irishmen banded together, led by men like Radio Officer Gerald O'Hara. But the conditions were designed to be unsurvivable. One by one, the Irish sailors began to die. William Knox from Dunleera perished. Owen Carr from Rush died in April 1944. Gerald O'Hara, who had led their Defiance, also lost his life. They were dying for a principle, vanishing unknown to the world. By the spring of 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. As Allied armies drew closer, the SS forced the prisoners of Bremen-Farge on death marches to hide their crimes. Thousands had entered the camp. Only a fraction marched out. Estimates of the dead at the Valentine Project run as high as 6,000. Of the 32 Irishmen sent to this hell, 5 are known to have died there, with more perishing in other camps or on the marches. When liberation finally came, only 28 of the roughly 50 Irishmen who were pressured to work for the Nazis survived the war. The survivors were shadows of themselves. James Furlong wrote that he was crippled now with rheumatic from his time in the camp. For men like William English and Harry Callan, their release was not a celebration, but the start of a long, painful recovery. They returned to an Ireland emerging from the isolation of the emergency. But there were no parades for them. They had defied Hitler, and for their trouble, they had simply vanished from their own country's history.
Stories of quiet courage like this deserve to be remembered, and with your help, they can reach far beyond these screens. Like, subscribe, and share Emerald Chronicle to bring Ireland's forgotten history to a wider audience of passionate history lovers. Every comment, every view, every share matters, and each time you watch, you are automatically helping fund this project, ensuring these stories live on for generations to come.
After the war, the sailor's story was buried. Ireland's neutrality was complex. While it's true Dublin quietly helped the Allies in other ways, like allowing Allied planes to use its airspace and sharing intelligence, this story didn't fit the public narrative of staying out of the fight. Acknowledging men captured while serving the British was politically awkward. While records show the Irish charge affair in Berlin, Con Kremen tried to get the men out of Bremen-Farge in late 1944. His efforts came too late for those who had already died. After the war, the silence from Dublin was deafening. It was the British government that finally recognized their bravery. Based on survivor testimony found in the National Archives in Kew, the surviving Irishmen were awarded compensation. The sums weren't huge. James Furlong wrote that his initial payment of £1,000 would pay half of the mortgage on my house, adding with stark understatement, "It was a pity it was not more, but it was an acknowledgement." Some survivors testified at war crimes trials, yet their story remained unknown. Decades later, the truth began to emerge, often thanks to the survivors themselves. In 2005, Harry Callan, the last survivor of the 32, returned to Bremen Farge and was shocked to find no record of him or his fellow Irishmen at the memorial. He realized if he didn't speak, their story of defiance would be lost forever. For 6 months, at the age of 88, he sat with his daughter-in-law and finally told the story he had held inside for over 60 years. The tale of the Irish sailors is a testament to the idea that history is made by the individual choices of ordinary people. Faced with the overwhelming power of the Nazi state, they refused to be broken. They refused to collaborate. While their nation officially stood apart from the war, they fought their own battle, not with guns, but with sheer, unyielding defiance. At least 5 of them paid for that defiance with their lives at Bremen Farge. Their death's a forgotten footnote in the history of World War II. It took more than half a century for their quiet bravery to be recognized, a powerful chapter of forgotten history finally being brought into the light.